The Plaza opened its doors on the 2nd of September 1939 and then closed the same day due to the outbreak of World War II. It reopened 2 weeks later. It went through many incarnations over the years. The front bore the names Odeon, Classic, and Canon before it finally became the Apollo in the twilight of the 1980s. Apollo announced major plans for the building, including a £750,000 refurbishment and increasing the number of screens. The investment never came, and the once great building fell into disrepair. Rumours circulated, suggesting the building was to be demolished. The cinema remained open but under constant threat of closure, finally shutting its doors in November 1996.
When I found out the Apollo was closing, I remember coming in and taking loads of photos with the staff. It was my world. I know that's really hard to understand, but I got bullied really badly at school. Tear-jerking sob story. But no, I had no friends and I got bullied at school, and cinema became my addiction.
12-year-old Paul Colshaw loved the cinema and treated the building as a second home, and the staff as a second family. He was outraged to learn that the cinema was closing.
I just remember thinking, we can't have this. I wrote to the Prime Minister. I did get a reply from 10 Downing Street, just to say, he doesn't deal with this kind of thing. But I got a reply nonetheless. And then the next minute, I just remember being on the cover of the Crosby Herald. And then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then Janet Dunn got in touch. And we were walking down the street to Waterloo, getting people to sign a petition.
Once I'd started collecting the signatures, that was it. I was completely taken in with it, the whole thing. And then it became a crusade.
My vivid memory of it, and it's still kind of that now, is just that absolute steely determination. Do you know what I mean?
But determination only goes so far. For the campaign to succeed, they would need cash flow. Funding was hard to come by, and if they wanted investment, they'd have to find the money themselves.
We decided to sell black moustaches, so we did a stick-on moustaches for £1, and in 3.5 weeks we'd raised £3,500 selling all these black moustaches.
The campaign needed a goal, something to strive towards, and they needed support. The employment services were on the scene and looking to demolish the building, and the campaign were fighting desperately to stop them. John approached all the major cinema companies and asked if they were interested in taking the building over, but they turned her away.
They didn't want a small independent cinema, so we knew the only way to do it would be to buy ourselves.
She'd called in at my office in need of help with this harebrained scheme that she'd got to stop a cinema being pulled down and converted into offices. She thought, along with other good people in the area, that this was just not right. And they didn't need offices, but they did want to keep their cinema, and they were prepared to put their own energy into it.
Towards the end of 1996, the campaign received some heartwarming news. The employment services backed down and withdrew their plans.
The employment officers pulled out because they didn't want to take on the local community, and a company called Derwent Lodge Estates, a property developer, bought the cinema. Derwent Lodge Estates, give them their due, they were very good to us. They allowed us the keys to go in at the end of May.
Getting into the building was just the first step. Jan and her team were chasing investments that would allow them to refurbish and open the cinema, but would the funds arrive in time?
This one particular lottery advisor come down, and he said, look, you need to open this place yourself. Don't wait for the lottery. You're going to make a statement to the local community, because everybody said, you're doing a good job, but it will never open again. So you're making a statement to them, and you're making a statement to the new owners, Derwent Lodge Estates. This is how serious we are. We want this building. We thought, right, that's it. So we really stepped up the business plan, and we advertised in the Crosby Herald. We needed people to come down and help to clean, and we had floods of people coming forward. So it was absolutely amazing.
As soon as I came in and said I'd like to volunteer. I got a brush and shovel put in my hand and just said, go in, just have a look around, see what needs doing. Then I got a screwdriver given to me, and then a hammer. It was all hands to deck, and there was running around doing whatever was needed.
There was no equipment whatsoever. Apollo had thrown us out of the porthole window onto the balcony area, so there was a lot of damage. So we had to source equipment. We only had a small amount of capital. A lot of that had to go towards the first payment on the lease.
They looked for funding for the new projection equipment, but it proved fruitless. A name was passed to Jan, Ron Cross, from a company called Western Cinema Services.
Ron, have you got any second-hand stereo equipment for sale? And he goes, why, have you got your equipment? And I said, no, we're still scratching around for it. He said, well, don't. He said, I'll loan it to you. And I said, what, £40,000 worth of equipment? And I said, well, what if we don't get the funding? He said, well, you can pay me on the drip.
And so Ron threw the cinema a lifeline, one that kept it running for many years.
Having decided to take over this dilapidated cinema and keep it going, having repaired the holes in the roof where the rain was getting in, and they were going to start off with a blockbusting film that nobody would have thought of would be seen first at the Plaza Crosby. The only problem was the people who had the rights to provide the film weren't about to do so, were they?
Basically, we got told in no uncertain terms we couldn't have the film. Even though we'd advertised it in the Crosby Herald, Jurassic Park, The Lost World is coming to Crosby.
They were like, well, why would we want to give an old-fashioned community cinema this brand new film when we can give it to, the Odeon and Switch Island?
So we decided we'd ask Sir Sidney, could he help us with this film?
Now what happened, if I remember it correctly, is I was on a cruise ship and I got a call to say a lady had come in and she had a really difficult problem to solve and not too much time, and it was hugely difficult and she needed some help. Anyway, I suggested,
write me a letter, my dear, and in the letter put, dear Sir Sidney, we need a blockbuster. So that's what we did.
When I got the letter, all they were asking, bless them, was to get Jurassic Park to open their reborn cinema. Well, the best news, the lucky news, the happy coincidence was that Dickie Attenborough was the star of the film.
Sir Sidney and Richard Attenborough met in the 1950s and collaborated on charity and film projects throughout their long friendship. Both passionate and dedicated to British film, they worked together at the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, more widely known as BAFTA.
It was lucky because I was able to pick up the phone to Dickie and say, now here's the problem, Dickie. And I explained about the Plaza Crosby, and Dickie, in typical Dickie fashion, said, I will speak to Percy Livingstone and come back to you.
Percy Livingstone was the president of the Film Distributors Association, the voice of the UK's film distribution industry, and one man who had the power to bring Jurassic Park to the Plaza.
I can't remember really how many days it was, but I do remember that the man phoned me and said, your friends have got the film.
It was absolutely amazing. We were dancing around the balcony. We were so excited.
With the film sorted and Ron Cross's projection equipment installed, the battle to reopen the cinema had almost been won. But with a week before opening night, and despite all that Jan and her team had achieved, there was always another job waiting to be done.
we'd gone into the building and my husband Rob had said, God, these are really shabby, these seats, aren't they? Prissy, we can't get them upholstered. And I said to him, I know an upholsterer. He said, well, I'll lend you the money. Speak to him and get him to do the job. So I phoned him up and I said to him, are you absolutely 100% sure you can do these seats? Absolutely. And in this time scale, no problem. And on the Monday, we waited, no seats. On the Tuesday, still no seats, and we were all getting a bit nervous. Wednesday, Rob and I went down to the shop and it was closed. Thursday night at 9:30, we were opening on the Friday, by the way, he turns up with 5 upholsterers and 5 sewing machines and proceeds to make these seats at the front of the main auditorium. He hadn't even got one together. He couldn't do it, he couldn't get the backs on. The volunteers made the seats, they did it. And he came to us just after midnight and he goes, we're not going to do this. And Rob, my husband, goes, you will do it. And they worked right through the night. All the volunteers stayed right through the night.
Everybody was excited and scared because we still had a lot of things to do. We still had the kiosk to set up. You know, nobody sort of had a role at that time either, so it was just fitting in.
And the first seat went in at 4:30 in the morning, and we had 220 seats to go. And at 7:25, we were putting the last seat in. We were opening at 7:30. To queues that went down South Road.
And then when we saw the queue at the opening night, everybody's near died.
The community turned out in force to show support for their reborn cinema. A campaign that started with one boy's dream and a determined army of volunteers had overcome every setback that came their way. Over 2 years they fought for a broken old building, long after everyone else had given up on it. Dedication, tears, letters, donations, phone calls, and a pinch of luck. And it all came down to this sunny evening in July. The crowds were waiting, the stage was set, excitement was in the air.
Yeah, I remember we were still outside for what seemed like eternity, just excited to see this film. And I remember bumping into so many people from school and just being like, oh, there's Chris, there's Lee, you know, dead excited. And being that age, going to see a lot of dinosaurs in a brand new cinema, feeling a bit VIP. We obviously walked around thinking we were amazing, you know. And I just remember everyone just starting chatting to people. And I remember as soon as the screen went on, I don't know what happened, if it was a noise or what, and I remember just everyone just like stopped and just stared.
It was so loud. You know, they clearly wanted to show off this brand new sound system, and it was like really loud, and it was just great. I was sat up in a circle, and just to have it open again and full, you know.
Everybody wanted to be there for first night. We must have turned 200 people away, and we had the queues to come in to the cinema started at 3:00 in the afternoon.
It was full. I remember that. It was absolutely heaving. There was just a sense of excitement, I think, because it's new. It had a new name, I suppose, so people would have been excited to just go and see the new cinema.
The new cinema showed its first film to a sold-out audience. The night passed in a blur for Jan and her volunteers. It wasn't until later that day they realised what they had achieved.
I didn't speak to Janet that night because she was too busy, but I think it was just a real sense of complete accomplishment. It was unheard of for somebody to be able to take on a huge company when all these multiplexes like the Showcase and the Odeon were doing so well. It was just against all the odds that she managed to do it.
We'd never experienced anything like that before, but all down to the volunteers. They did an absolutely tremendous job. Of course, after, you know, we'd all obviously celebrated, and after the evening was over, reality set in, and tomorrow morning we had to come down and clean.
After the success of Jurassic Park, Jan looked ahead for the next blockbuster.
The next big film to come out was Men in Black, and I wanted it. Now, you couldn't just ring the distributors up and say, I want this, because they just tell you to go away. You have to have somebody who's got a relationship with them.
Unfortunately, the Plaza's first film booker proved to be the booker from hell. He refused to work alongside the cinema and had his own ideas about how it should be run. A phone call discussing Jan's ambitions soon turned hostile.
Oh no, you can't have Men in Black. you're going to have Batman, which is 8 weeks old. And I said to him, but I don't want a film that's 8 weeks old. I want the next big movie. I want Men in Black. And he said, you've just lost 8.5 of your 9 lives. He said, you are not worth the dirt on the distributor's feet. I am that close, and he clicks his fingers over the telephone, from telling you to book your own film.
Word spread of the Plaza's problem, and it seemed that the community cinema was destined to fail before it even begun. But one man came forward to offer support: Jeff Hornsby. He had been in the film industry for 60 years. He had the contacts, he had the knowledge, and he wanted to help.
And it was through Jeff we got Men in Black, we got Full Monty, and we got Titanic, all on days. And if it hadn't have been for Jeff Hornsby, the Plaza would not be here today.
Over the next few years, the cinema continued to grow and overcame many hurdles, including securing £66,000 in funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation to put towards the purchase of the building. They did this on the 13th of January 2000, just 2 days before the lease was due to expire. Emotions were high, and the future looked bright. In 2000, the Plaza brought in a new general manager. Jan took this opportunity to move away from the day-to-day running of the cinema and to concentrate on the bigger picture. In the Plaza, a new system was put in place with new employees and a new ideology, and things slowly began to take a turn for the worse. The new manager was unable to cope with volunteers and began to take on staff that the Plaza could not afford.
The cinema manager came up to me one day and asked me if he could get me a job looking after the kiosk, would I be interested? So obviously I said yes straight away.
Over the next few years, the cinema began to hemorrhage cash, and audience figures began to drop. The community began to reject the Plaza, and troubling stories began to emerge.
To be honest, the trustees took our eye off the ball, and unfortunately for us, I started hearing terrible stories about the management and what was happening down there.
It was going through a bad stage. We did used to get gangs of teenagers coming in, messing around in the foyer. The doors had to be locked sometimes, and that is not a good for the Plaza's reputation. Audience numbers were definitely dropping.
It was known as a flea pit. It was so badly organised and ran that young people would go into the Plaza and be turned away because they were making a noise.
Most of the staff were good, but we did have one or two members of staff who for some reason didn't like teenagers or young people, and for whatever reason, for any reason, they started banning people. And then quite by accident we found out that a lot of the local schools were actually boycotting the cinema.
People won't come because they're getting turned away and they're getting treated terrible. And I came down as a customer myself. It was a Wednesday night and I couldn't get in because all the doors were locked.
I think there were weaknesses in management because I don't think the door should ever be locked myself.
And I remember banging on the door. The duty manager then came and I said, but why are the doors closed? He said, because there's a group of kids outside making a noise. And I knew then we were in dire trouble.
The Plaza was a sinking ship. A change in management was called for, but even this couldn't stop the inevitable. This was compounded by the failure of the heating during the worst winter in 30 years, the collapse of the drains, massive overheads, and low audience numbers.
It did go through a stage where it was really quiet, and obviously the community wasn't making good use of the building at all.
Well, at that time there was many a week when a few of us wondering whether we were actually taking enough money to get to pay us.
Sometimes, yeah, we were only getting 6 to 10 people,
And sometimes we would turn the films off because there wasn't anyone in the screen.
If it wasn't for the shop at that time, we probably would have closed, because the shop kept us going for so well.
The shop made quite a substantial amount of money and did fund the cinema for quite a considerable amount of time.
Keeping the plaza afloat during these dark times, the shop had actually been established many years before, in November 1996. Set up by Jan's sister, Ginny, in the early stages of the Plaza campaign, the shop was conceived to raise funds and keep the plaza in the hearts and minds of the community. For over 10 years, Ginny was the face of the Plaza shop, until her sad passing, 15 years to the day from the Plaza's grand reopening. In her time, she raised over £500,000 for the cinema and left a legacy that endures to this day. In the wake of Ginny's passing, John and Jean took over the running of the shop and provided much needed support to Jan and the cinema during the difficult years ahead. But the shop alone could not support the plaza.
On the 16th of June 2010, I walked into my conservatory, which is this, and said to my husband, Rob, we've got no money, Rob. We've run out of money. And he said, what do you mean we've run out of money? I said, there's no money. I can't pay the wages. And immediately I had to go in and I had to tell the staff.
All the paid staff were called into an office for a meeting, and it was all explained to us, the whys and wherefores, and they just couldn't carry on employing people.
We were very upset. We weren't shocked because we sort of knew things would happen because of business, but we didn't think we were all just going to be maybe done something like that.
I think that was the worst time that we've ever had. We had to make all kinds of savings to claw back money because obviously we quite clearly couldn't afford it because we were in a bit of a mess.
I paid them redundancy. I paid them over a period of time. And then I came back in and Colette Tully, she came on board.
Poor Jan was nearly on her knees because she'd taken on the role as manager again, and she was doing so much work that you could see it was starting to take its toll on her.
Because I was cleaning as well. I was in the building cleaning. We had to get rid of the cleaners, we had to get rid of everybody. We had to do a line by line austerity and cut everything to the bone. Rob and I went through every line of the budget and we cut.
Jan was working herself into the ground, trying to keep the cinema afloat, putting tremendous strain on her personal life. Something had to give. And
Rob came up to me and he wasn't happy, and I started to get upset, and Colette came up to me and she said, what's the matter? And I said, I can't cope anymore.
That's when I stood up to become a duty manager. I think I took on 4 days then as the duty manager, to try and hopefully thinking if we got back on our feet that people would be employed again.
And that was it. It was amazing. And then Martin came home and said, what's the matter? Told him, he said, right, we'll look at, taking some of the pressure off.
Yeah, okay, we didn't have money, we were, the funding wasn't great.
It just seemed that every time we seemed to get to a favourable position where we'd get some money, the rug was pulled out from under our feet. A
lot of thanks has got to go to the likes of Robert Dunn, who did who helped us, he sort of gave us a loan and helped us sustain to stay open, but we did have a difficult time.
The thought of closing the plaza after everything that had happened was more than I could bear, and I just couldn't do it. I was prepared to sacrifice to do it.
The plaza struggled on for another year, with various fundraising campaigns started to bring the cinema back into the public eye, including Sefton's Got Talent and a cycle from Liverpool to London, supported by Stephen Fry and an old friend. The tide was finally beginning to turn, but the plaza needed a makeover, and it needed the community's help.
The turning point was when Team came in, and that seemed to change the whole emphasis of everything.
Kieran Owens from Team came to see me. I was working, it was a Saturday, and he'd come in with his family. He came up to me and he said,
what's going on, Jan? we're not getting people here. We're not getting the publicity. It's getting bad publicity. People are saying this about the place. I was like, maybe we can help. She's like, how? I said, well, maybe it needs that little refurb.
He said, right, we'll do a type of challenge Annika, where we will come in over a week and we will refurbish the building.
We all had a meeting, got the lads together, and at first everyone was like, oh, well, what can we do? What can we offer?
We knew people, we knew joiners, we knew stonemasons. So we knew that we had all these type of trades where people would come and get involved. So that was, I think it was overwhelming for Jan, you know, especially that day. But it did take 5 months of planning, ringing round, getting the labour, getting people, putting it constantly in the paper, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I think when we did put that in the paper, of that action shot of us looking like the village people. but when we did, you know, people couldn't wait to help. Materials, you know, you're talking thousands of pounds worth of materials. I've got this, I've got that. It wasn't like, you know, we were left with junk. Everyone had something.
Trying to get people like ourselves who've been to the cinema, like back when they were kids or when they were adults, or they bring their own kids, and try and keep it in the community for the community.
Because people were complaining about the seats and that it was looking old. Although they loved the building, they didn't like the inside. And it was conflicting because they wanted it to stay as close to the original as possible, but upgraded.
Oh, I was really excited about the concept of the refurb, and the fact that team were able to come in and lend their skills and labour and things.
After the months of careful planning, the day had arrived for the Plaza's big makeover.
So we shut shop. Remember the skip coming? A big skip. And we were all looking at each other, right, what's coming out first? I think all the confectionery come out. And then that was it, that kiosk. That T&G cladded, stained kiosk, you know. It's only when you look back at them pictures you think, that's why they weren't coming, Jan. But we got rid. And I think when it went, say, Keel's looking at me like, gotta finish this now.
Finish what we started. All the lads who never usually pick a hammer up, they were straight in there for the first 5 minutes.
And then ran out of energy.
Yeah. Going home at, I think it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm thinking, I'm getting up for work in 2 hours because I had to go and work on the Friday. And then it was like, is it really going to be finished before the deadline?
Well, that was it. Yeah, we turned up at like 10 p.m. on the Thursday night. Keel was in work, so I weren't. Fortunately, I weren't in work, but so I stayed through till 8 o'clock that morning, and then I went home for a couple of hours sleep. I came back for the Friday and into the Friday night with Kate, but I think the Friday night hit home a bit like, we've only got 2 more nights at this, 2 more 24-hour shifts. Is this going to happen, you know?
It was amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was utterly exhausting because we had a week to do it. So we were getting in there at 7 o'clock in the morning, earlier than that maybe, and we were leaving in the early hours of the morning, grabbing a couple of hours sleep and getting back there.
Oh gosh, from 6 o'clock in the morning mainly till 10 o'clock at night. And then I'm back again sometimes 4 o'clock to let the builders in, or team, Kieran and his lot in.
I think it was more towards Saturday day, going into Saturday evening,
yeah.
When people were still looking at the task and thinking it might be a bit too much.
Morale was there when it was feeding time, right? So Nicola's restaurant, sending down 40 pizzas, 40 hamburgers, trays of Coke to keep everyone here.
Everyone going.
Because everyone was like, oh, go for me dinner. We knew we weren't going to see them. You know what I mean? see them back. So it was brilliant. It was good. That is community. Then I think Sunday morale came straight back up with everyone got this second wind. We had an awful lot of volunteers on that Sunday. I remember when my mum was here, she was here till 2 o'clock in the morning, cleaning the seats in Screen One, no hoover and vacuuming. We had that many cleaners. It was unreal, wasn't it? You know, and it was difficult. But I would say Sunday evening going into Monday everyone started getting a bit of a high then, you know.
After days of work, Team and their army of volunteers put down their tools and breathed a sigh of relief. The project was complete. The plaza had been given a new lease of life, and it was time to reopen the remodelled cinema to the community.
We cut that ribbon, fantastic. I think when I come back 2-3 weeks later to see a film, you couldn't get in. That wasn't the problem 3 weeks previous, you know. They couldn't sell the seats. And it's that way now, I think, we've done it.
The cinema was closed for a very short period of time. It was as if someone had come in and waved the magic wand. It was absolutely and utterly transformed. I suppose I've always been proud of the cinema and what it stood for, and I've always enjoyed showing people around. But once it had the facelift from Team, with the new paint on the walls in the screens, the ceilings in the screen areas being done, the new flooring, and then the transformation of the foyer area, it became an absolute joy.
We gave it the facelift it needed, and it gave people what they wanted. So they started coming back.
It looked a lot brighter coming in, and numbers definitely grew after that. It was good for business, definitely, yeah.
Gobsmacked, basically. It's so different. It looks so absolutely wonderful. So different from the way it was a couple of weeks before. I was really impressed. The extremely hard hours had been put in by Team and by a number of the staff at the plaza.
It was the catalyst that started the rise of the plaza.
Once they came in and did that overhaul of the whole building, it sort of like a new emphasis became apparent in the area, and people were thinking, oh, what have they done? Let's go and have a look. And it did work, you know what I mean? A brighter foyer where people could come in, and since then a lot of work's been done to improve it even more so.
It gets more gorgeous every time I visit it. They've done something else. It just gets better and better.
It's now a magnificent cinema, and it's not just a cinema and they show films. It is a social centre. It's a community centre. It's just a marvellous place for the people of Crosby.
The first time we have money in the bank, we're taking on paid staff. So now we've got a manager, we've got a volunteer coordinator and duty manager, which is John Lyons. Richard Warren was reinstated in 2011 as the duty manager and office administrator, and also Nick Waring came back as kiosk. So we've got a little core, members of staff that keep everything ticking over.
The cinema's in the best position it's ever been in its 20-year history. We've just seen 135,000 people walk through the door in 2016, and that is anticipated to even increase even further to in the region of 150 plus.
It's just going from strength to strength. The audience levels started to rise.
Last year we were awarded the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service, which is the equivalent of an MBE, which obviously we were absolutely delighted, shocked and delighted to receive.
When you go past and you drive past and you see that and you see the queues and you think, I was part of that.
You go past, or you're speaking to someone, school play court, pub, anything, and talking about the plaza. It's got this vibe now. People are coming here to socialise as well. It's not just cinema and out. It's pulled it all together. I'm extremely proud of the place.
One of my proudest moments is the fact that the Plaza, through all the strife over the years, is still here, and it's just amazing for me that we never gave up. We got told many years ago we wouldn't last 6 months. You won't last 6 months, but here we are, 20 years on, and it's absolutely incredible.
Through all the trials and tears, the Plaza stands to this day as a shining example of community spirit. The future is never certain, and the cinema still has to fight for its place in an ever more competitive industry. But it remains run by ordinary people who give their time expecting nothing in return. People like Paul, Colette, Nick, Richard, Christine, Martin, Kieran and Keel, Sir Sydney, and of course, Jan.
If it closed tomorrow, then I think every single person who had something to do with it for the past 20 years should be like unspeakably proud for keeping it going for 20 years in a world that is surrounded by huge chains. It's independent, and it's done it affordably for the community with volunteers and the goodwill of the local area and people. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, long may it continue. Here's to the next 20. I think, going to get a little bit deep and a bit of a bigger picture on you now. I actually thought of the Plaza only a few months ago. Something terrible was happening, and I remember feeling really helpless and thinking, whatever this issue was in the world, I was like, I feel so helpless. I can't change this. It's a horrible feeling to feel helpless. And then I was just reminded of the Plaza, and I thought, actually, that started with a handful of people getting together who felt the same about the same thing, and that group got bigger, and the cluster turned into a community, and the community turned into an army, and the army turned into this. And 20 years later, it's still here. So this is living proof that you can change things in life if you're passionate and you're willing to fight for things against all the odds. And that's what I think this building stands for, and I think that's what Janet and all her volunteers stand for.